My name is Julia Feliz. The first thing I want to do is actually apologize that we were not able to find an Irish Sign Language translator for this event, despite searching for weeks. We really did. We hope that we'll be able to find someone for next year. We're able to do this next year. Originally, I was going to memorize this speech, but then I realized that it would go against what we're attempting to do here with this conference. I have inattentive attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, and that means that in part, basically my short-term memory works differently, particularly when I'm put on the spot. My brain it never stops thinking and chattering, which makes focusing on specific things more difficult than it would be for someone that does not have ADHD. So my brain is split between trying to focus on the moment right now, the nervousness or the excitement, or basically thinking about the vegan donuts that I had this morning, or the new Daddy Yankee song that was just released. I don't know if you've heard it, with Janet Jackson. Ooh, that's pretty awesome. And basically about 20 million other things all at the same time. So this means that I actually find it easier to read this to you in order to anchor my brain to the present moment and make sure that basically my message to you is being expressed in the way that I need it to be. I will also probably make reading mistakes and lose my place, as ADHD also affects how I experience reading. And that's just it. Those of us from marginalized communities experience the world much differently than the accepted and standardized norm. There's nothing wrong with me. I'm simply neurodivergent, and therefore my brain just works differently. Just because I'm doing vegan or animal rights activism does not mean that my neurodivergence takes a back seat, though. It's how I experience the world and how I interact with it. I can't just, leave it at the door, which is something I hear quite often from the vegan movement as a response to those that let the movement know what we need. Unfortunately, the world is not set up to understand what is considered normal to someone else like me. And instead, I'm expected to assimilate, to adapt, despite it being against my own nature. There are some of us that are also marginalized in different ways for more visible reasons, or reasons that are obviously visible to the world. And this affects every aspect of our lives and everything we set out to do from the time we were born. As a person of color, I'm perceived through biases that I must navigate in spaces that are often not aware they act on those biases. Why? Because these implicit biases against Black and brown people are taught in a society as the norm, where a certain type of individual is the accepted way to be, and these implicit stereotypes follow those deemed less than. And you can think of it this way. In our world, the accepted way to be is human. Human is the norm and the standard that is applied across the world throughout a supremacist hierarchy that places different species on different levels. We all know this in basic terms as speciesism, where humans are on the top and non-humans are seen as less than. For centuries, this is also what has been done to marginalized humans through a hierarchy based on skin colors, for example, in which anti-Blackness is reinforced and applied throughout the world. To be Black and brown is to be seen as less than, because that is what is taught in our society subconsciously. And no, these issues have not been solved, and they are still very much present in society right now. And the thing is, that this type of hierarchy follows vegans of color, even in vegan spaces. We can't just leave our skin color at the door. And unless you're aware of how we experience our lives, the microaggressions, the racism, the xenophobia, the stereotypes, you might unintentionally add to it. This happens quite often when we are told to give up our safety and march side by side racists and xenophobes for the animals. Or when we're expected to show up to protest with police presence at an event even though people of color are targeted by police for just being brown and black. Or when we're told that human oppression is not as important as non-human animal oppression. Or when well-known leaders in the movement preach for the tolerance of bigots and bigotry for the animals. Personally, I don't think I should be expected to be part of events where vegans in attendance think that ADHD does not exist or is a ploy by Big Pharma. I'm certainly not going to find the accommodations that I need there. Autistic vegans and vegans with other disabilities probably won't either. This is called ableism. I also don't think I should be expected to engage with those that think tolerance for racists is the way to go as long as they're vegan. I'm certainly not going to feel safe in a space that upholds a hierarchy where my safety and life hold less value in order to create new racist vegans, which will simply continue to uphold the very speciesism that keeps non-human animals oppressed. I or anyone else should not be expected to tolerate vegans or non-vegans that insist that my struggles are not real or not valid or not as important when they are struggles that shape how I experience the world. And you don't have to understand it. You just have to respect that we have different needs, experiences, cultural histories, influences, and struggles that mean we experience veganism differently. And by ignoring how upholding hierarchies designated to marginalized people like me exist, and by tolerating them, you keep a veganism a movement for a privileged few. How? Because tolerating bigotry for the animals means that you uphold various types of supremacist ideologies, which doesn't make sense when you claim to want to abolish human supremacy. To continue to claim that we must water down the meaning of veganism or that we must tolerate bigots in the movement or ignore imperfect ideologies that get people murdered, as long as we do it for the animals, has created a movement that thrives on its own brand of supremacy. I know you're probably trying to make sense of what I've just said, but this is where I actually need you all to listen even more carefully about what I'm going to say. If you, as a white person, white passing person, or privileged, marginalized person, claim that the struggles of other marginalized humans do not matter as much as non-human struggles, or that our struggles are not all valid or important in the quest for justice and liberation of non-human animals, you're upholding a veganism that thrives on intermingling supremacies in plural, and is fueled by established tools of oppression. This brand of single-issue veganism, which has become the mainstream norm, is lacking in the awareness of animalization as a tool of white supremacy and how it gave rise to an offshoot of speciesism, racialized speciesism, that actually affects people of color specifically. This type of veganism places animals first in a way that it flips the hierarchy where the most privileged are at the top, only to be followed by non-humans, not even seen as their own communities, but as a lump sum of species to be saved by them. Then we find marginalized humans at the very bottom, as their struggles are seen as less than and not real or worth addressing. Ironically, marginalized humans are routinely told we can speak for ourselves, while continuously silenced when we try to tell the vegan movement what we need to help veganism spread, because our oppression directly impacts non-human animal liberation. In essence, single-issue mainstream veganism has not actually disrupted speciesism. It actually thrives on human supremacy. Mainstream white single-issue veganism has evolved into a movement that assigns values between species, humans and non-humans, through upholding the experiences of those that do not have awareness of oppressions that they have never experienced because of the way the world is set up. This has happened by the continual tolerance of isms, and despite being told repeatedly that racism, transphobia, classism, ableism, and many other forms of oppression exist, are alive and well, and intersect with one another to complicate our activism even more. Yes, veganism is a movement centered on non-human animal liberation. However, human and non-human oppression is interconnected. One will not achieve liberation without the other. Veganism will not achieve its goal if it does not acknowledge the need to embrace a veganism that is consistently anti-oppression. Veganism will simply continue to be just another form of supremacy centered on the most privileged, with the most resources, if we do not work on root issues. The connections I have just made for you do not mean that you don't have your own struggles. It does not mean that you are a bad person for not having been aware of struggles that you don't experience or the connections you are just starting to make. It is simply an effort to sound off the alarms of reality that veganism as a movement has serious issues that need to be addressed if it is to put non-human animals first, front and center in their own movement. And with this opening statement, I'd like to thank you for being here, and to everyone tuning in online. And this conference will work a little different than what you're probably used to, in an attempt to truly have the voices of vegans of color heard and given a platform, which is often denied to us. We will not be taking questions. We will not be debating with you about our own oppression, or experiences or cultures. We simply hope that you will be a guest in our space, and that you will take the time to listen to our perspectives on veganism as we educate and discuss with one another issues that affect us. We are grateful for being given a space, and above all for the support from Nara, Laura, Dani, who approached me in the hopes that we could work together to give vegans of color the opportunity to address the movement in a space where we could discuss issues that affect us and are important to us. As the first ever Vegans of Color Mini Conference, the talks today will bring you awareness of issues that are holding back the movement from vegans of color themselves. We are members from the world's majority, and it is not an understatement to say that you will not achieve non-human animal liberation without understanding veganism beyond how you experience it. If you take any understanding with you from tonight, let it be that we are asking the movement to embrace a veganism that is consistently anti-oppression, one that is aware, willing to evolve, one that understands the connections between oppressions, and one that does not add to the oppression of marginalized humans and non-humans alike. This is important for all vegans from all walks of life. Racism, Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, classism, transphobia, homophobia, ageism, xenophobia, sexism, body shaming, health shaming, and the list goes on, do not belong in a movement that claims to want justice. Non-human animals are truly centered and first in their own movement when we make sure not to add to the oppression of others, and when we work towards creating spaces and campaigns that address root issues. A veganism that is consistently anti-oppression means more people going vegan. Is that not what we want?
Yes.
So this is the start of a very important conversation that we all need to be having across the globe. I have worked hard with other vegan activists to create resources to help you understand how to create the most effective movement. And before you think, oh, she's just trying to sell us books and stuff, I'm really not. There is literally I'm not. I actually run Sanctuary Publishers, which is a new vegan book publisher that actually gives back for basically sales help publish more resources and to publish much needed books, and also support specific organizations and projects. I need to drink water. Thank you. So the first resource is a website that I worked on with Carol J. Adams, Carolyn Bailey from Australia, and Meneka Repka. And it's basically a website, consistentantioppression.com, and it has what's called the Vegan Bill of Consistent Anti-Oppression, which is literally a guide, literally there for you, to help you understand some of the issues in the movement that really need to be addressed in order to be more effective. And there are 12 steps, and then each step is discussed in further detail on the website. And that, The second resource is veganismofcolor.com. This is a website created by vegans of color for people of color. It's basically vegans of color reaching out to their own communities. So it's basically a resource for you to not mess up. Use it. If you're if you know a person of color and they ask you about veganism, you have no idea literally how to do it. So send them to vegans of color who literally know what they're doing and talking about with regard to their own community. So that's there for you. The next resource was a Vegans of Color community book project, which I'm really proud to be a part of and have edited, Veganism in an Oppressive World. And it's also basically a step-by-step for you to understand how vegans of color experience veganism. And there are, some of the authors are here. And and the other resource is Food Justice, edited by Sarita Rodriguez. And it's a collection of activists and academics and farmers and others involved in food justice that are also vegan. And it's a way to sort of bridge the interconnections and help vegans understand why food justice is actually vital for veganism as a movement to understand in order to spread veganism. So I've actually made a list of these resources because I knew none of you were gonna write anything down. Yeah, no, I know. So resource, please take one before you leave. And also I do have copies of the book because, they are for sale because each book actually supports the publication of other books and supports projects such as Chilies on Wheels, which helps feed vegan meals to people in need, and they're also working in Puerto Rico. Sorry. So,
how much is it?
Oh, you can ask me later. It's still reading. So please, if you're interested, come talk to me after. And please take the time to read all this stuff. Like, it's literally there. And a little bit about tonight. It's me, the intro, then we have talks. They'll introduce themselves. Then there'll be a panel in which we'll ask questions and discuss with each other on relevant issues. And then we'll have a concluding statement from KR Vargas from La Raza for Liberation. And KR will be on tomorrow at 2, right? Mm-hmm. Okay. So sometime tomorrow, I think it's at 2. And you can continue the discussion on that topic. Thank you for having us, Ireland, to Piers Hussey and everyone at Dublin VegFest for supporting us and having us here, making this possible. And that is from me. So next up is Dani Black.
Oh, God. Do you have my present? Yep. Thank you. Oh, wait. I can't see my notes.
Oh, no. Oops.
Okay. Let me see. Can I fix it? Maybe not.
Maybe the better.
Okay. Ready? Okay. Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming to listen to my talk. And I want to be open with everyone as I can. So I'm going to tell you that being around all of these great vegans of color who are really so far in their journey makes me feel a little bit of imposter syndrome. So I've been vegan for just a few years, but I've been me my whole life. So what I'm going to do is talk to you about stories, my experiences, what my life has been like, and how those stories and experiences for me relate to my current view of what veganism looks like. So people tell me that I like to tell stories, and I'm good at telling you all the details about the stories, and kind of my role in life in general is just being a storyteller and passing on information between people. And I suppose that's true. I do like to look at stories from multiple perspectives and see everyday situations and see what kind of connections I can make between what's going on currently in that story and what's going on in the rest of the world. So I'm going to tell you some stories about like some girls, but spoiler alert, all the girls in the story are me. So it's kind of my stories. So all right. So, like, this is me when I was younger, and by the time of this picture, this girl was assaulted by a boy who probably was assaulted himself, too young to understand the concept of what sex is, and too young to understand what's happening, and yet still being sexualized, and for someone else's pleasure, someone who's far too young is being presented as an offering for someone else. Okay, by this time, the girl had provided a lot of entertainment for preschool and elementary school boys who looked up her dress, put their hand in her skirt, and tried to kiss her in the hallway. Again, for someone else's pleasure, people put you on display and treat you kind of like a plaything. All right, so here's another picture, a fun one. So this girl's mom did her best. Her mom's white, by the way. She did her best to take care of black hair. And the combination of mom doing her best and like an overly rambunctious child, this is the hairstyle I ended up with almost every day. So that's the fun part. The less than fun part is kids at school would definitely call her a bear, a dog, a dirty dog, a Sasquatch, chocolate. When they find out, her mom's white, you get new names with white stuff mixed in, like zebras, Oreos, mutt, half-breed, mocha. Either way, they see her as an animal or as food, right? Either way, she's not them. She's expendable. She's some type of object. She can be used, consumed, observed, have her origins questioned, bought, sold, etc. Okay? This girl was told, "You're too fat to be a model." We need to make the clothes look like something women want to look like. They don't want to look fat like you do. So I kind of laugh every time I see this one, because I was like a size 8 at the time, and they said, "Way too fat. You're way too fat to be a model. You will never make it in this industry. You can't look like this. This is completely unacceptable." But I laugh because this is like, anyway. So again, hair, not easy enough to manage it. You need to straighten your hair. You need to, in order to have any kind of value and be worth money in this industry, you need to show yourself to be a healthy weight. You need to show yourself to be healthy size. You have to have the right skin color. You have to make sure you tan appropriately, not too much, not too little. You need to have your hair be perfectly organized and your makeup be exactly on point. The only thing you need to do is modify yourself at your essence so that you can maximize value for other people. This girl was queer, but she was tamed, trained for obedience and submission. She learned that even though she wanted to be free, she needed to be useful to a man. She needed to use her baby maker body to create babies. Being with women isn't fruitful, it's not profitable. Therefore, you should be with only one man and have lots of his babies. To prove your worth, they said. The only alternative she can see is death. This girl, does she look kind of like she was asking for it? Later on that night, this girl lost control of her body and realized again that she'd not had any control over her body since the age of 5. This woman did what was requested, married a man, and got pregnant. He stole her children. He stole her children from her too soon. He stole them before they could make it into this world. He tried to kill her if she disobeyed. He tried to kill her if she did something wrong. She was his property. He controlled her reproduction. He controlled her coming and going. She was his prisoner and his slave. Leaving was an act of resistance that was not supported by authority figures or anyone who should care. This girl made friends, family, real connections. These lovely individuals supported her in whatever way they could, shared love, and asked nothing in return. These friends and family are in this together. We're in this as one family. Good story, right? What does that have to do with veganism? So I'll tell you. When I look into the eyes of farmed animals, I see the girl who's married. I see the 5-year-old girl. I see the girl who's tamed, who's been beaten and broken into submission. When I see non-humans in circuses, I remember preschool, when I'm used as a plaything. I remember when people think of me in terms of how much value I can add to the world and how profitable I am, and not as the person that I really am. When I see non-humans in situations that they haven't consented to, I remember all those times I couldn't consent. When I see animals mutilated physically for our benefit, I think of all the dieting and body shaming that I've experienced. Non-humans and people like me, we're fighting against the same people for the same things. Our consent, our bodily autonomy, our personhood, everything about who we are, we're fighting against the same system. These two categories of issues, human and non-human issues, aren't categories for me. They're my life. They're so intertwined. I know that my freedom won't be achieved without theirs, nor theirs without mine. So thinking of veganism in terms of saving someone else, in terms of I'm saving the animals, is really erasure of a whole body of issues that happen to people who are really comrades in this situation. We're all in this together, and we're all a family. So the way I'm looking at veganism is about moving us as a group of people forward together. Otherwise, nothing will change. The conversation always needs to be around how to address systems of power imbalance that negatively impact all of us. If you focus on only one issue or the other issue, you're missing the point. That's it. Thank you.
And I apologize about my voice. I actually have a cold right now, and it's also really dry here, so if it sounds like I'm gasping for air, I probably am. I'm very excited to be here over Skype, and this is such a wonderful opportunity. My only regret is that I couldn't make it in person to see all of these people that I've either worked with or spoken to online. And most of all, I want to thank my friend and longtime supporter, Julia Feliz, who is probably there right now, who, along with the other organizers, was instrumental in making this event possible. And I'm so grateful for her invitation to speak here today. Before I begin, I must acknowledge that I'm currently occupying the traditional ancestral lands of Canada's First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people. Specifically, I am on Treaty 7 land, and I remain in solidarity with Indigenous people all over the world who continue to resist theft of land, water, and resources by governments and corporations. So I'm going to be talking today about the vegan flag, and my talk is based on an article I wrote about a year ago when the vegan flag began to gain popularity in mainstream vegan spaces. I've noticed that since that time, the popularity of the vegan flag seems to have declined, despite it being overwhelmingly supported by mainstream white vegans. And I'm not precisely sure how to account for this decline, but I do strongly feel that a critical discussion about flags and what they covertly represent is still needed if we, like being those of us in the human community, are to address oppression in a consistent and radical way. So a recent example of this is the rainbow pride flag. Though the flag is meant to reflect the diversity and unity within the LGBTQ+ movement, Black, Indigenous, and other trans people of color remain the most marginalized. They experience disproportionate murder rates and are overrepresented in prisons while lacking representation even in queer-friendly spaces like pride parades, marches, and the media. Recently, Daniel Caemawr, who is white passing, came up with a reboot of the original flag to include a striped chevron. I don't have a PowerPoint, so you're gonna have to picture it, overlapping the initial design of the flag with the colors of the trans flag, along with black and brown on a triangular arrow pointing to the right, which is meant to represent progress. The problem here, as Julia Feliz has pointed out, is that this design appropriates the Puerto Rican flag. Daniel has exceeded their original goal of 14,000 on Kickstarter of this campaign, while Julia, a Puerto Rican person of color, has not received any significant funding for the new inclusive pride flag that she conceptualized and brought into fruition with graphic designer Haley Brown, and both of them are vegan. So while people of color try to reclaim flags as they reclaim their own histories and lived experiences, they are still up against colonial powers that privilege and benefit people who are as close in proximity to a white male. So moving along to the vegan flag. On June 9th, 2017, Gad Hakimi released an official vegan flag with the intention of unifying the vegan movement and developing a clear and consistent brand for veganism. The flag is freely available online, and if you have your device on you right now, you could probably just do an image search for what it looks like. It is meant to be shared widely as a mass-mediated image amongst vegans and other mainstream public spaces. In a recent analysis of the emerging interest in the vegan flag, Frances McCormick argued that the flag erroneously centers vegans rather than non-humans as a marginalized group, that it upholds a capitalist approach to veganism, and that it assumes that the flag, or that the vegan movement is currently in a state of unification. Following McCormick, I would like to further problematize the flag from a critical race and decolonial perspective. I contend that the flag covertly upholds Western imperialist and racist ideology, one, through its conceptualization as a flag in the first place, its dependence on Western linguistic and alphabetic conventions, and finally, the symbolic associations of its colors. So, primarily my concern with the vegan flag is that fundamentally all flags are entangled with a historical colonialist narrative. The notion of a flag to denote a symbolic and legal claim to land, resources, and people was popularized by Western societies and continues to function as a marker of Eurocentric power structures globally. For racialized people, flags in general are a reminder of ownership and occupation, as well as violence, genocide, and cultural theft that come along with colonization. In the current social and political climate, flags are also clearly aligned with the military-industrial complex, a system that merges corporate interests with government and military to further entrench a colonial legacy. In addition to upholding speciesism by displacing non-humans from their natural homes and forcing them to participate in military activities, the immediate connotations of nationalism that are conjured by a flag are underpinned by the school-to-prison pipeline and an overrepresentation of racialized people in prison systems. Therefore, marginalized groups remain subjugated as a result of what flags represent. Even seemingly benign uses of flags, such as the Girl Guides flag, are still connected to colonial traditions and participate in a system that continues to uphold Western imperialism and values. As a Girl Guide myself for many years, I can still recall part of the Girl Guides pledge. It might be different in other parts of the world, but in Canada, it stated, "I promise to do my best, to do my duty before God, the Queen, and my country." And we recited this with militaristic precision every week in Girl Guides. So by ignoring this history and its residual effects, the vegan flag perpetuates the myth that a flag is an appropriate and universal tool to unify vegans of color with the mainstream white vegan movement. So in the vegan flag, the dominant visual element is a large V located in the center and extending to the top corners. The V represents veganism in English and in other language systems that are Eurocentric in origin, but it also signifies the colonization of ideas and language by Western cultures. While the term veganism is still fairly new to Western discourse, there have been civilizations throughout history and around the globe that ate veganically and continue to celebrate their identities through the consumption of only plants. Indigenous societies all over Africa, India, the Shakaharis, for instance, Southeast Asia, excuse me, and the Americas, who use different language systems, but have been eating this way for centuries, have been effectively erased by this flag. As some point out, however, this way of eating was not necessarily intended to bring about animal liberation. Yes, that is true, because indigenous societies that lived with a reverence for the earth and understood our connection to nature were also not factory farming millions of animals and reducing the status of these animals to commodities. So there was no need to hashtag empty the cages until white people invented massive killing operations and popularized capitalism. The idea of eating plants through the dominance of a V becomes congruous with mainstream, which is white veganism, and it is indicative of culturally coded assumptions of Eurocentrism and European alphabets as universal. Finally, the ideas represented by the color choices of the flag continue the embodiment of a Eurocentric representations of reality and truth. Although interpretations of colors and their meanings can vary, the designers stated, without irony, on their official website that they chose white for its associations with light, goodness, success, and beginning, and blue as symbolic of heaven. Again, the idea of heaven is primarily Eurocentric idea and eliminates many Eastern traditions. Further, the obsession with white as an indicator of goodness and success has been used throughout history to oppress and subjugate people who do not meet the criteria to be racially white. The reason the color white can be accepted as symbolic of goodness and success is because white people have determined themselves to be inherently good and successful, implicitly reinforcing the color black's negative interpretations. Thus, those who are not white must be better suited to a life of enslavement and servitude. This paradigm is reinforced by the blazing white V on the vegan flag, reminding us that the vegan movement is a white movement, with the most dominant vegan voices being those that de-emphasize or ignore racism and other human struggles in the quest to forward animal rights. So I argue for a rethinking of what symbols we use in the vegan movement to represent unity. And that is all I have to say.
Thank you. We'll catch up.
Hi.
Hello. Hi.
My name's Selena. Selena Caemawr. Caemawr is a Welsh word. There's a tradition in Wales for poets to have a nom de plume or a pen name, which describes where they were born or grew up or lived at the time when they were writing, perhaps. And Caemawr literally means big field. But I like to say grand meadow. So I'm going to be talking about ableism within the vegan community. It's something that I think a lot of people aren't really aware of happening, but if you do have a disability, it's really quite obvious that it's rife within our community. So I just want to give us an opportunity to explore what that looks like and how we can tackle it as individuals. So this is me. I'm a poet and activist. I'm the director of Aubergine Cafe, an events community interest company, which is a social enterprise that's been set up to employ the entire staff will be autistic. So it's going to be an autistic run company. And the idea is that we're going to use evidence-based research to try and change the way that businesses are run to make them more autism friendly. What that research tells us is that when companies, quite often big IT companies like Microsoft are very good at this because they understand that autistic people have got an immense value to some industries, certainly. They're very good at participating in this research, and what they show us is that to make an organisation autism friendly, you actually make it people friendly. Everyone communicates more clearly, people are more comfortable and happier in their work. When you have a happier workforce or community, they give back more, so they're more invested. So the idea of this is of that organisation is to try and close the employment gap for autistic people, only 17% of autistic adults. This is a UK statistic, not Ireland or the rest of the world. But in the UK, 17% are in full-time employment. That's compared to, if you compare that to disabled people is more like 49%. So about almost half of disabled people are in full-time employment, with just 17% of autistic adults. That's not to say we can't work. We're quite often very good at it. Sometimes we're too good, and that's why we get fired, because we're like, did you know that if you put that chair there, you may be personally liable for manslaughter if there was a fire? Yes, I'm that really annoying person who pays particular attention to the rules. I am black, and I'm queer in all of the ways, and I'm autistic. That's me. You can see there's a gold, well, it doesn't look quite gold on there, but there's a gold sort of like infinity ribbon there. That's a symbol chosen by autistic people in our community to symbolise going gold for acceptance. So not just being aware of autism, but just accepting it as a valid identity and difference. Here's a question for you. Are you ableist?
Probably. We all are. Probably.
Yes, probably. We were. Let me see if I can close this. Yeah, we were raised to be. From when I was very little, I remember all sorts of slurs that were thrown around that we just thought were okay, basically. Things that I would never say today. I don't even want to say any of them out loud right now, but we'll talk about that later. But in terms of making changes and dismantling oppression, the first step is to acknowledge that we are part of it. You know, just like the first step to dealing with substance misuse, perhaps, is to admit that it's an issue. We have to own it first if we want to make deep changes. We are part of the system, and instead of being passive and just allowing it to happen, we can actually, as individuals, make changes. So we'll look at ableism now. What does ableism look like? Why should we care? And how can we make individual changes to be more inclusive? Dictionary definitions, hate them. Right? But basically, ableism is discrimination in favour of able-bodied people, it says here. Not just able-bodied people. Dictionary definitions are not very good at explaining forms of oppression. If you look at racism, the amount of times I've had white people say to me that it's racist to have black-only spaces because it's discriminating against white people. It's like, no, there's a whole structural thing going on here, and it's huge, and you cannot put it in like 6 words. 6 words in a dictionary definition. So there we go. But when we're talking about ableism, we're talking about discriminated against people because of a disability, or being prejudice. So making our minds up about people because of a disability that they may or are perceived to have. I'm going to focus a little bit on autism because I am autistic. I have got 36 years of experience in autism, which is more than a lot of people. It is quite often characterised by this triad of impairments. So these are things that anybody can have. But you know when people say, oh, everyone's on the spectrum somewhere, what they're saying is everybody has some of these issues. It's only when you have a significant number of issues with your social relationships, your communication, and the rigidity in thought and play and so on. It's only when you have a significant number of those, enough of them, that makes you on the autism spectrum. So you're on a spectrum, not necessarily the autism spectrum. How autism affects me is sometimes I talk too much. You're supposed to laugh. Oh my God. Sometimes I say jokes that people don't get. Sometimes I don't get other people's jokes. Sometimes people laugh at me and I'm like, why are you laughing? but no, I quite often have sensory difficulties, so this room's lovely and quiet right now. But sometimes when I walk into a room, I hear like lots of voices, and the best way I can describe it is if you imagine there are a bunch of pins, you know those pins like for with sewing. If somebody had if there were some of those inside my head, and they're just like flicking around onto the inside of my eardrums, okay, it causes pain signals to fire off. So I feel physical pain sometimes with sound. That's just one of the examples, but that's one of the things that makes social relationships difficult, so like going out to noisy places and so on. But I won't go, you can ask me about autism afterwards if you want. I'm happy to answer any questions about that. So when I've been talking to people with autism about online interactions, and I'll focus a little bit about online interactions because I think veganism is hugely present online, and a lot of activism happens online. What I found is that quite often miscommunications can happen with autistic people. There are a lot of autistic people. There are a lot of us online because it's an easier social situation to be in than in the physical presence of other people sometimes. But what can make it easier, and these are suggestions by autistic and neurodiverse people, people with ADHD, people with learning difficulties. If you want to present a message, be it about veganism or whatever, and you're going to write paragraphs, like an explanation, try breaking it down into little chunks. Awkwardly small chunks, like almost grammatically incorrect chunks. That will actually make it much, much easier for other people to follow. People who have attention deficit and so on, or people who have chronic fatigue, quite often just can't read that much in one go. So that's a little tip that can help both your message get across better, but also help people who have those kinds of disabilities to understand. Say what you mean and mean what you say. I struggle with metaphors. I do use them. I get them wrong all the time. But sometimes when people say something sarcastically, I don't always get it, or it can take me a little while to work that out. Avoid reading into comments by autistic people for subtext. If somebody has made you aware that they are autistic, try to understand that usually when we speak, we say exactly what we mean. We're not kind of saying something for you to kind of work out what we mean by it. So if your argument is surrounded like, oh, but you said that, and that means you mean this. If it's with an autistic person, that's probably not the case. Another thing to look out for is that we are often very, very direct. That can come across as aggressive. And this can be the same for people with ADHD and so on as well, because we sometimes don't have that filter or the ability, the cognitive ability to make it softer. And it's like, if you don't say exactly what you mean, how are they meant to understand? That's okay. So it's like we have to be direct in order to be understood, but by being direct, we're often misunderstood. I realise I'm not offering you any real solutions. I'm offering you the opportunity to think about it so that you can go away and consider how you might make individual changes. Okay? I'm not here to change the world today. But I do want to come back to that aggressive thing. I do have a friend who is told like every day that they're aggressive, and it really severely harms their mental health because of it. They're not aggressive, they're a big teddy bear. They're just very direct. Hey, Ableism bingo. I don't know if you can see that. These are some examples. I didn't write this. So what I've done is I've tried to pull things that are readily available online, so that if you want to go ahead and look things up afterwards, you can go and search for them. But if you were to Google ableist bingo, the search engines are available. then you might see some of these things. So being ableist doesn't necessarily just mean being directly attacking somebody because of their disability. I want to point out this one. So in the disability communities, I don't know if you can see, everyone can go vegan. That said a lot, but this wasn't, I don't think this was written by a vegan. I don't think Mr. Jenny is vegan. But this is the message that we're presenting. We're presenting that vegans are ableist. That veganism isn't a safe place for autistic people. And it's not just those ones that are like saying, oh, I can't go vegan because this and that. No, the whole like autistic or disabled community will be like, veganism is quite ableist, right? And it is, sorry. Move on now. I want to introduce you to Sam. So Sam here, Sam is disabled. They don't have a colon. They've had lots and lots of surgeries to treat their disease, which is colitis, and many of the complications that they have with it. Now the thing with Sam is that when they eat vegetables, they come out and digest it. So yes, they bite into a carrot. A few hours later, out comes a carrot. So they can't actually absorb enough nutrients for them to sustain life. They don't have a choice to eat a vegan diet. So that's Sam. This is Avery. Avery's autistic. They eat only bland, mild foods. Very, very simple textures. Nothing too sort of like crunchy, nothing slimy, like no mushrooms or anything like that. Trying new foods sparks very, very severe mental distress, meltdowns, and disordered eating. An eating disorder. But with lots of help and patience from others, they have begun to eat more vegetables, but so far not enough to cover their basic nutrition. So this person at this stage in their life is also unable to eat a vegan diet because they just wouldn't get enough nutrition. They are trying though, but it would be very, very easy for them to reverse that trying if people were to be very pushy with them. Sam and Avery are both advocates for veganism. Sounds weird, yeah, but they both understand the importance of veganism, and whilst they're unable to eat solely vegan because of their disabilities, remember they don't have a choice here. We're not talking about people who have a choice. We're not talking about veganish. That's a whole different discussion. They actively encourage others towards veganism through their actions. Sam, for example, runs a business, a community business in the form of a pub, and they have a whole vegan menu. If vegan groups want to come along and use their venue for events and so on, they will allow them to use it. So they're actually reaching out to many, many people in terms of vegan activism. So I guess what my message for that was, we need to pick our battles. Who should we be challenging? What will have the biggest effect? Is it worth us arguing with Sam on the internet and saying that you're an awful person, when actually Sam's probably doing more than I am, I'll be honest. And this vegan utopia world that we all dream of, it's not going to happen overnight. We have to play the long game, so we need to think strategically, and attacking people who have disabilities who don't have a choice shouldn't be part of that strategy, ever. So yeah, does disability discrimination benefit the animals? Sam and Avery have been supported by vegans to promote veganism further, and as a result many more people are now adopting veganism. The net result is that more animals are being saved. Yeah, it's not an abolitionist approach. I would much prefer an abolitionist approach, but the net result there, yeah, like I say, please don't attack disabled people for something they don't have a choice of. So how do we make room? Let's make disability inclusion a central part of our activism, not an afterthought. So let's not think about booking a room and then afterwards go, oh, someone's asked if it's wheelchair accessible. No, you need to think about that in the first place. Okay, it should. If you have an event and you call it a march, well, not everyone can walk. There are other words that you can use. You can call it I don't know. You're clever people. You can work it out. It's just a case of just thinking about it. Not everyone can make it out to a protest, but there are many other jobs that people can do online. So asking if there are any people who would be able to like work from home, for example, and do some activism online, do some spreading the word and so on. There are ways to include people who can't necessarily walk or be in social situations, or like me, I do go on parades, but it's really hard, and I have to have like earplugs and ear defenders and this and that because people have got vuvuzelas and whistles and anyway. Familiarise yourself with vocabulary around disabilities, and if you've got the ability to do so, please change your language to avoid alienating potential vegans and allies. And I'll give you some examples here again. Sorry, did you want to take a picture of that?
Mm-hmm.
Here you go.
Never mind. I can ask her for the picture.
You can have a look afterwards if you want to reference. I picked this up off the internet as well, again, because I want people to be able to find it very easily. These are some examples of things that people say on the right-hand side, like, that's insane, crazy, psycho. These are words that are either describing disabilities as a negative thing, or words that maybe were used before in like retarded and dumb. They used to be medicalized words, which we don't use now. But these are specifically around disabilities, whether they're physical, mental, and so on. These are some easy examples of alternatives that you can use, and you can find them all over the internet. If there's a word you're thinking of, it's like, oh my gosh, that event was crazy. You can change it to wild or epic if you want to be like super millennial and but also I do want to point out that yeah, it is awkward and difficult to change your language that you've been using your whole life. It's not as hard as changing your diet and all your clothes and everything to make them vegan. Okay, if we can be vegan, we can change some words. It's been mentioned in the previous two talks in the in the intro and in Dani's talks as well, that animal liberation is a natural next step from human liberation. When people consider the welfare of other people, it's natural to continue that onto animals once we get used to that. And I think that inclusive movements do benefit everybody. Do you want to do better?
Yes.
So I'm talking specifically in terms of disabilities at the moment, but this works across the board with like race and so on. Support our communities, follow us online, share our work, uplift our voices. If you talk to me afterwards, I can give you some ideas of some people to follow on social media. And thank you for listening.
Good evening, everybody. The title of my talk is Veganism and Hinduism, the Disconnections, and then I gave it a little subtitle, The Vegan Washing of Hinduism. My name is Rama, and I want to say a little bit about myself.
Can you make it full screen?
Huh?
Can you make it full screen?
Oh, it's not full screen. You know it needs to be full screen? Because I got all kinds of animations. I want to figure this out. Okay. Yeah, works. So I introduced myself. As I said, my name is Rama. I came from a vegetarian culture. Okay, I've eaten vegetarian all my life, and I was taught it's eating animals is disgusting. Is it okay for me to walk? I guess I shouldn't be walking.
Yes.
Okay. Maybe I should stay in one place. It's disgusting, not particularly because we cared about them. It's just because it's disgusting. Milk is okay. Milk is pure and white. Milk is fine, okay? But eggs are benefit. But yeah, a vegetarian all my life. My social position is kind of the upper strata of the Hindu pyramid, I guess. So I was born into a Brahmin background, right? Oh, great, it's wonderful, right? So, and I'm not even going to look, but I'm sure some of you here, maybe not, but some of you here, you're vegan and you think you're almost a Hindu, or maybe a Buddhist or Jain even. Maybe you do yoga, and India is the land of vegetarianism and ahimsa. Maybe some of you think that. And that's kind of what I'm going to be talking about, okay? All right, so vegan washing of Hinduism. No, okay, what this slide is about is I'm just going to tell you what the takeaway is in case people don't listen to any of the rest of my talk. So, what is wrong with ahimsa? Okay, and the Orientalist vision of India. I don't know if the Orientalist has a big O anyway. Or what is wrong? I'm going to talk about that. I don't know about you, but if I go to my Facebook and I look and see how many of my friends, white friends, who have the name ahimsa, I'd say about 50. And I don't accept all the friends who ask me to friend them either. And who is responsible for this colonial vision? Who controls this narrative about India? Okay, so yeah, what's colonial? So I'm going to show the next slide. So yeah, we had British colonization for 200 years. And so the Europeans, they made a story about India. It was very convenient for them. But then again, who is controlling the narrative? Well, I thought, yes, all white folks are doing this, but actually it isn't. It's me. I'm doing it. Us. We're doing it. The people from India who are controlling the narrative of the upper castes. Okay, because the other castes, they don't get to talk to you. They don't have a platform. I got this platform. You know, I get to talk to you about this. They don't have a platform. The view we have of India is not right. And it's not going to help veganism. I'm going to talk a little bit about current situation in India. Beef ban, okay? So what that means is cows are not supposed to be slaughtered. It's illegal to slaughter cows. Yay, right? No, there are consequences. No, it's for people and for the cows and for other animals. So what are the implications for the vegan movement? Okay, don't valorize Indian vegetarianism, Hinduism, ahimsa, or even Buddhism or Jainism. You know, don't give it a great value. Don't put it up on a pedestal. Think it's something wonderful because it's not going to help. Oops, so sorry. No, I didn't. Do not valorize Gandhian principles. Gandhi was a casteist. Okay, everybody in our movement wants to say Gandhi is the example for us to follow. No, I'll tell you why not. And if you want to represent people of Indian descent, please attempt to include lower caste people and people from the Dalit, Adivasi, and Muslim communities. You're not being representative if you don't have a diverse panel. You're not getting the voices that you want to hear. You're not getting marginalized people if you only have people like me. I know I'm not white. I've never passed for white. Even in the dead of winter, it's never happened. I'm not white. I'm a person of color. But I am the oppressor. I'm considered the oppressor. So, okay, you might have seen this. I'm going to go quickly over this, kind of a brief history, very contested history, but, you know, I know the truth. So, India had certain so-called indigenous people. What do you mean by indigenous? Everybody came out of Africa, but anyway, we had certain indigenous people. About between 3,000 and 4,000 years ago, the people from the steppes over here, I can't point over there, migrated into India, and wasn't really a very violent invasion. They just came in there and they settled. And the caste system began with the Indo-Aryan migration. They're called Indo-Aryans. So, came from the north, the northwest. So right now, India is a mix of all these different kinds of people. Okay, other invasions occurred over the millennia. Significant ones: the Muslim conquest in the Middle Ages, and of course the British rule. So we had colonialism, but we had all kinds of other invasions and migrations that happened over millennia. Okay, so what is the caste system? Here is a picture about stratification of the Indian society. You can see 4 main ones right here. So and one at the bottom. What I'm going to do is start this, and I'm going to have Sujata Gidla mention it to you for the in the interest of time, because she does a great job. Sujata Gidla is a writer and author of Dalit descent. She is a Dalit. So she's written this book called Ants Among Elephants, which has been highly celebrated, and I think she is writing another one right now. I'm going to let her explain.
The first time I knew that I was inferior, I probably was 18 months old. I knew that we were untouchables. Untouchability means actually untouchability. You cannot touch them. Caste is a forced occupation based on your birth. When I first came to America, people treated me equally. In fact, even in the beginning, I used to feel, what if they touch me? They're going to be polluted. One time, a boyfriend of mine was eating from something that I'm already touched, and he was going there, and I said, no, stop! I touched it, and his heart broke. Like, you're not in India anymore. Hinduism more or less is an ideological, religious prop for this social system that is caste. Brahma, the creator, the Brahmins are supposed to have come from the forehead, and the Kshatriyas from the arms, merchant caste from the thighs, service caste from legs. And untouchables are not part of any of Brahma, the creator. What makes them untouchable is they are assigned hereditary duties that are considered filthy and menial by the Indian society. Like the hardest jobs are theirs and the filthiest jobs are given to them. Based on these different occupations, there are about, in my area, 52 different subcastes within the untouchability. And my family is called Mala. Mala means people who do agricultural labor. And there are others who do like removing dead animals, burning the dead people, and carrying away human. My stories, my family stories, were not stories in India. They were just life. Your life is your caste is your life. At 26, I came to America, where people know only skin color. Only in talking to some friends I met here did I realize that my stories, my family stories, are not stories of shame. It's not healed. It is not healed.
Okay. I'm going to stop that right there. So I'm going to go back. I think it gives you a very good idea of this caste system. So what Ms. Gidla was saying, she's like at the bottom, she's the Dalit, which is even outcast, which is not, beyond the pale. It's not the first 4, okay? So these are highly marginalized people and margins of society. And how many people are we talking about? About 15% of India. So what, 1.4 billion, okay, India is, and then we have 15% Dalits, and then we have Adivasis. They are tribal populations, which is supposed to be another 10 to 15%. So 30% of India is this marginalized population. So 30% of 1.4 billion, about 400 million people. 400 million people, and then there's this row right here, which is they are as bad as treated as badly, some of them. And let's talk about this set right here, the top caste, the Savarnas. That's supposed to be 30% of India, and the Brahmins, who are right on top. Can you guess what percentage they are?
3%.
Yeah, about 5. Okay, in South India, where I'm from, it's 2.5%. 2.5%. Okay, so when you have a panel and they're Indians, they're all Brahmins. I mean, whether that's in India or in the USA, are we representing India? We're not. Okay. Okay. Let's move on. So I just want to show you this picture. It's a documentary called India Untouched by Stalin K. It's free to watch on YouTube, and I recommend that you watch it. We are told not to touch people lower in caste than us, so we don't. Okay, so these people are polluting. We don't touch them. In fact, you can't. Their shadow is not supposed to touch you, and various other things which I don't have time to go into. So, what is the caste system? Well, casteism and speciesism, they're the same. Look at them. I mean, not the same, but look. I mean, so before I was, I learned this pretty early, right? We learned to be speciesist very early. Before I could even talk, I had speciesism in my head. So, and before I could even talk, I had casteism in my head as well. Yeah, I had them both in my head. Okay, so these things, one of the reasons,
I wanted to take a picture.
oh, I'm sorry. That's,
Sorry, do you mind
I have it up on my page and everything. You can totally take it. It's widely available. Okay. So what is it about? Okay, what is it going to do with what we eat? Well, Dalits, who are the poorest people, well, they eat what's thrown out and whatever is available, because the upper castes are drinking milk because it means lots of cows, and the cows die. Dalits can't afford the milk, so they eat the dead cows and they skin the dead cows, and so that's part of the reason why they are polluting. Okay, that's why you can't touch them, and that's why they're dirty and disgusting, and you can't look at them, all this kind of stuff, right? So, okay. I'm going to bust a few myths, okay? India, are we vegetarians? Well, 29%. Okay, so and when and take a look at where I come from, which is the south of India. I mean, we've got like 2% of the people being vegetarians. That's a little green spot in the middle. Okay, about 2%. Now, when I say 71% are non-vegetarians, what does that mean? Are they eating the vast quantities of meat, eggs, and dairy that the Americans are eating? 220 pounds per person this year? No, not that, of course not. But we're talking about identity, okay? So if you gave this purple a cow burger, they're going to eat it because they're non-vegetarian. They don't have a problem with that. So, India is not vegetarian. And here's another tweet. There's a great Dalit community on Twitter, and I try to follow them. And this person's name is Christina Danraj Thomas. And she's saying, oh, it's a funny conversation. So person A, is there non-veg for lunch today? It's how that happening in India, so it's Indian vernacular sort of. Don't know, I'm veg anyway. Oh, are you veg? Oh, yes, I'm a Brahmin. Oh, I'm pure, right? Oh, I'm Dalit. I love non-veg, especially beef. So this person, I think it's Christina, she's trying to provoke, okay? Well, you might think I'm impure for eating beef, but you know what? I'm gonna be impure, so there, okay? So that's what she's saying right here. Sorry for this picture, but I wanted to, so I want to bring what's going on here, and I think the first slide that Julia had a really kind of this, but this is Kimlicka and Donaldson. What they're saying, dominant groups, okay, they think about individual groups in the way they're backward, they're barbaric, okay, the way they treat, in this case, animals. And what we're doing to these minorities, their practices are cruel, and what we're trying to do, we're vegan and animal rights activists. So what we're actually trying to do is improve the treatment of animals, but what we're actually doing is reproducing long-standing prejudices, and it can be seen that way. Just a couple of examples of this is, I go to YouTube. This is Bangalore, one of the places I live. You could look up Chennai, which is the other places, where my family lives. And when they say upper caste landlords, they're looking for vegetarians. What does that mean? They're saying they don't want any lower caste people. We only want the pure vegetarians, right? That's not veganism. That's not it, right? So here's another one. They're saying, oh, we are going to make a whole community of Brahmins only, and this word sattvic right there means pure food. We don't want any of the other folks. That's what it's saying. Okay. So why is it the cow is sacred? You've heard India, cow is sacred. Why is the cow sacred? Why isn't the buffalo sacred? The buffalo is indigenous to India, and the buffalo gives milk. I know we're vegans, but gives milk. Buffalo is also meat. So if a cow feeds animals, and that's why the cow is sacred, because that's what they say, why isn't the buffalo sacred? Well, because because the cow is what the colonizers brought with them. They brought cows and they brought horses. They were pastoralists. Okay, so the cow is identified with them, whereas the black buffalo is identified with the indigenous people, and that's why the cow is sacred and not the buffalo. Okay, now what about Hinduism? Does it even exist? Yeah, I mean, obviously it sort of exists, but what does it really mean? Well, Hindu wasn't even used till the 11th century because that's when the Muslims came, and so when the Muslims came in, then they had to say who's not a Muslim, and that's when the Indus, the name, that's where the Hindu comes from, that's when it started. And then colonial views, people wanted to have this unified vision of what those people were, especially for missionary conversion, so they made this rainbow, this pantheon of religions and gods, and put it all together and made it Hindu, and tried to make it into one thing, try to fit into a form which doesn't really exist because it's all widely varying, all kinds of practices. And we, some of us in India, the majority, have kind of drunk the Kool-Aid. You know, that we begin to believe in it. So what about ahimsa? Okay, well, the Rig Veda, which is the first sacred text written about 1500 BCE, talks about animal sacrifices. Okay, cows and horses and a variety of other animals. Yeah, ahimsa was there, but all the time the sacrifices were there. I mean, what animals can be eaten? Pretty much every animal can be eaten. Like they talk about rhinoceros and alligator. Yeah. Ahimsa, what does it mean? Well, if you kill a cow for sacrificing, that's ahimsa, because you're killing it for sacrifice. Okay? So if you kill a cow for a Brahmin, that's ahimsa. You're not violating any rules there. So the way that it was defined in these old texts, okay? Brahmins are vegetarians. Yes, it's true. The reasons why that is there's so many different ones. I couldn't find the consensus, so I don't want to talk about that right now. It's just too many. But the fact is, it is true right now. Vegetarianism is practiced by upper caste, particularly the Brahmins. Okay, so what nonviolent spirituality? There is a famous historian called Romola Popper. She says, you know what does that make any sense? Nonviolence, religious violence is not alien to Hinduism. It's not true. Where did it come from, this idea that we're nonviolent? Romantic image, Orientalist scholarship, and the requirements of nationalism stressing the spiritual superiority of the Indian culture. Something that we need to believe. This is an article that came out this month. You know, it says, is India really a spiritual civilization? It says, no. Okay, there are some spiritual threads, but we're also very acquisitive. We're very materialistic. Okay, so these are ideas that people want to have about us, and even we want to have about us. It's not true. What about Gandhi, right? Oh, what a great symbol. Well, I recommend you take a look at this article by Caemawr Soundarajan on Medium, so it's accessible, everybody can get it. And what she has done is really summarized a lot of things from different books and referees, done a really great job. So please take a look at it. Gandhi was, let me summarize what she's saying, and there's absolutely true evidence for all of this. Gandhi was anti-black. He was a lawyer in South Africa, and he said some pretty rude things about black people. Never changed throughout his life. He was a casteist. He wanted to abolish untouchability, but he was still casteist. And some people should be the latrine cleaners, and that's what their kids should be forever. That's the way it should be. That's what he thought. And he was misogynist. And take a look at that as well. So what is Caemawr saying here? Ms. Soundaraj is saying, I'm not talking about, but not talking about the truth in order to protect personal attachments to his myth, simply maintains false ideas about many core discussions that we urgently need to have between our movements. Okay? So, I mean, and Dalits and other people, you know, they don't like Gandhi. they don't see him as a hero. So, what are they going to think when vegans, especially white vegans, come along and say, you know what, Gandhi is our leader. This is Arundhati Roy. She's been amazing in bringing a lot of this to the fore. Now, you might ask, if casteism is so bad as you say it is, Rama, well, how come we've never heard about it before? Yeah, how come we haven't? And, you know, she asked the same thing. One of the most brutal modes of hierarchical social organization that human society has known. How come people outside India don't know about it? You know, when we hear about things like apartheid and racism, sexism, how come there's no outrage? Well, she says, oh, it's to do fuse with Hinduism, mysticism, spiritualism, nonviolence, tolerance, vegetarianism, Gandhi. Backpackers. Okay, here's the Beatles. The Beatles and the backpackers. But I love this. Okay, Dr. Ambedkar is a social reformer, economist, lawyer, politician from early 20th century, and he was, as I say, a reformer and from the Dalit community himself. So the old Orthodox Hindu does not think there is anything wrong in the observance of untouchability. To him, it is a normal and natural thing. As such, it neither calls for expiation nor explanation. So I'm talking about maybe my grandparents. The new modern Hindu realizes the wrong. That would be us, okay? But they are ashamed to discuss it in public for fear of letting the foreigner know that Hindu civilization can be guilty of such a vicious and infamous system or social code as evidenced by untouchability. And I think that's brilliant. So what about Hindutva, right? I'm not going way over. Oh, I have the timer going. Oh no, I'm over time. Okay. Means Hinduness. I'm going to go through it quickly. Basically, we have a right-wing power, a right-wing party in power, the BJP, the Bharatiya Janata Party, is based on Hindutva ideology, which is about Hindu supremacy. Okay? So, discrimination against Muslims, lower caste, Dalits, Adivasis, and so on. Now, I'm going to skip past this. And so that's how the beef ban started. What is the beef ban? The beef ban is to marginalize Muslims and Dalits who eat cows. India still hopes to be the top beef producer in the world, or among the top 2 or 3. But they are lynching people in the streets. I'm going to go through this quickly, but you know, people are being killed on suspicion of killing cows or eating beef in India right now. And this is not veganism. We don't want to support the beef ban. Cows are still being killed, by the way, in enormous, enormous numbers. This is a way to marginalize people further. I want to really read this quotes. I wanted to get quotes from some people about what they feel. So this is Chair and Subramanian, Executive Committee member, I forgot an E there, the Ambedkar King's Studies Circle, and they told me, I said, what do you think about the beef ban? How do you feel about it? I can ask the first part. Second, how it affected me, not sure. But anyway, they say, I wasn't consuming it. Just after the ban and subsequent atrocities on Dalits and minorities made me rethink and reevaluate my food choices. So I started eating beef as a counter-narrative, and in fact, I do consciously making effort so my kids also doesn't have any sort of aversion based on some stupid preachings like I got from grandparents and parents. So what are they saying? Okay, so you have a beef ban. I know you're trying to marginalize me. Well, I'm going to eat beef on purpose. So the beef ban doesn't really work even, right? So I'm sorry, I went to this is an extra slide. Okay, so this slide, from Car's slide, this slide is from another person who did not want to be identified, but they are a Catholic and but not practicing. I fully believe the ban was motivated by oppressive upper caste Hindu domination and opportunist business reasons. Heck, I even remember there being a conference organized on how to push pork as the protein of choice way before the ban even happened. I'll stick with the oppressive motives because that's what I'm reacting to. As intrinsic as beef has been to my own idea of what constitutes food, and therefore the personal anger, I can't even with having to deal with what it means to have that happen to you as a Muslim. But this person is not. I'm afraid you won't be able to get much more out of me because all that follows is incoherent anger, the kind you feel when someone says something both absolutely outrageous and obtuse. Now, this is actually a person who we have a lot in common with, but the way that things, who might be an ally, but the way that things are happening, it's not working that way. Another quick one. I asked this person, what do you think about the fact all of these Westerns, Americans, Europeans, whatever, are connecting Hinduism and veganism together? I think it's a really bad connection to make. It's strengthening a very toxic Hindu nationalist agenda. Okay. then and this is Danica Karna, she's on Cardiff, and then she's in Cardiff, and then I asked them, why is it I can't get dogs to talk about this, because I couldn't get enough quotes from them, and she said, yes, I imagine they find it difficult to accommodate a vegan perspective when they're arguing for freedom of choice, but then the freedom of animals not being considered, which is incredibly sad. I do believe that veganism or vegetarian should not be forced upon anyone, which is what the Hindutva is trying to do. So what I'm going to summarize: do not valorize Indian vegetarianism, Hinduism, Ahimsa, or even Buddhism. Do not valorize Gandhian principles. Have a consistent anti-oppressive approach if you want to represent people of Indian descent. Please attempt to include lower caste and Muslim communities. And I want to give you a few examples before I go. This is Dr. Tuttle, an email that was sent to me from 2017. Okay, so Dr. Tuttle, who's wonderful, I love him, he's actually a friend of mine. So he was shown around by somebody from the Sattvic Vegan Society. What does Sattvic mean? It means pure and unpolluted. It's a casteist word. We don't want that associated with veganism, okay? And then, oh, Indians will remember their roots. And no, Dr. Tuttle, you have to do better. You have to do better. There's more to us. You don't know what casteism is. You don't know what's going on because all you've heard is narrative from the upper castes. Okay, some other people recently, so slick. I mean, Tobias, I've never heard him talk about Hinduism before, but all of a sudden he has a Hindu symbol, the Om symbol, and Ahimsa is his page, and and then we have this bro attitude, and James asking, he's going to give a talk on Ahimsa. Well, maybe we can. No, we can't. Again, no. No. And okay, what about this? Okay, save movement. Okay, we love the save movement. Absolutely great intentions, but they follow Gandhian principles, and we know what some people think about Gandhi. Dr. Francione, he went to a Jain conference to speak about how could Jains be more Jain by being vegans. So, you got to give it to him. He does do his homework, I guess, Dr. Francione. And Veg News and all these other news outlets, vegan news outlets, were so happy when the beef ban came along. And I don't know how Leo DiCaprio got into it. Oh, we were all so happy. And no. Okay, I'm going to finish. I want to give you a few tweets that I think are really good. I have so many. If I wasn't so good, I would have got. Here's one. How do you define freedom? Because Independence Day was August 15th. Okay. How do you define? Last month. How do you define freedom? What is your definition of independence? Would you call killing in the name of cow and caste freedom? Can a country like India ever be free from caste discrimination? This person is saying, what are they trying to do? They're taking away our food, suppression and undernourishment of a population, a cold and cruel tactic, a cold trick and tactic. And this person is saying, what are you talking about? India is vegetarian, privately loves the chicken. No, we're not lying. We're not vegetarian. Okay.
I guess this part of the conference is a way.
I think Peter's asked me to come be a part of this panel.
Oh, okay. Yay! So, I don't remember what I was saying.
We're having an ADHD moment. It's like, okay, what now? Yeah.
So I'm gonna ask questions and we're gonna discuss. So I guess the panel is a way for us to be able to raise even more voices and more issues that we feel we need to discuss and we want to discuss. So I have questions. So vegans of color come from so many different backgrounds and histories. In the book Veganism in an Oppressive World, many of us here had an opportunity to speak about those influences in detail and what that means with regards to how our communities view veganism. In my mind, addressing root issues due to colonialism is a huge part of that accessibility and experience. How do you experience veganism as a vegan of color? Michelle? And who you are?
Oh, yeah, so I'm Michelle Carrera. I'm the founder of Chili's on Wheels. which is a program mostly in the U.S. based, but also in Puerto Rico, that feeds vegan meals to people that are in need, communities that are in need. And I think veganism the way veganism looks in communities is different all around. There's not one way of practicing veganism, even though there's only one way that's presented, and not just in how that looks in our food, but also like what our motivations are and what we're striving to get to. So I'm Puerto Rican, and I lived in the United States for 14 years and just came back right after the hurricane to serve food to the people that were without because of the storm. And Puerto Rico is still a colony. It's the oldest colony. It's been a colony since its inception. It was first since 1493. First with Spain, then in 1898 with the U.S. So the U.S. is still currently occupying Puerto Rico. And so the way that veganism looks there, the way that people have started going vegan, is mostly for health issues. We're also one of the top because we're fed this U.S. diet. Everything is imported. They did away with our agriculture when they took over, so that we depend fully on the U.S. Every food has to come from a U.S. ship. We can't get international ships coming in with food. Everything has to come through a U.S. ship. So everything, we're fully dependent on the U.S. at this point because they've made it so. And so our health is terrible. We have the highest levels of diabetes. We have high levels of cancer. Because also they've done horrible testing with bombs. They had a little island called VoC, which they use for bombing practicing. And so health is the number one reason why people have started going vegan. But now we have this whole new group that has chosen veganism as a way to kind of reclaim their identity, reclaim their land, going so far as what foods were there before even the Spanish came along and eating that food, because that is what our bodies are meant to eat, because that's the lands that we're in. Those are our ancestors, and so the food that they were eating is going to be the healthiest for us. And so it's a rejection of the commercialism of these like products like Daya, and I don't want to, all vegan alternatives are kind of doing away with that, because that also feels like it's an imperialism coming in. It's like, here, you eat this, that we've produced here, and not what is ample. It's such a rich and fertile land in the tropics that there's no reason why we shouldn't be eating the food that grows there. And so, so this is what comes to mind when I think of how veganism looks in our communities, like the reasoning behind it. If you come and tell someone, here, try the Beyond Burger, like that's not necessarily, first of all, it's price prohibitive. Everything in the island is also like almost twice as much, as in the United States, price-wise, because everything has to come through a U.S. ship. So our reasons behind it are different, and so the way that you approach and the way that you advocate is not going to be the same. So you have to think about who your audience is. If you're going to try to advocate for veganism, you can't just advocate in the same way to everyone.
To add to that question, what are ways in which you as vegans of color with intersecting oppressions see connections between our struggles and those of non-human animals? Kez? Yeah, go for it.
Just kind of, I just feel like hi, I'm Kez. I use he or they pronouns. I am a queer and trans vegan of color. I'm black, as you can see that. And kind of, I've always found, like, I've always had, like, this connection with kind of what everybody was talking about in terms of consistent anti-oppression. You know, like, for instance, I think, like, when I would talk with my brother's also vegan. He, you know, the way how I help him, you know, understand me as, like, a trans person is that I say, hey, would you want a white person saying this about black people? So why would you want, like, a cis person to say this about a trans person? And he seems to, like, understand that, and he seems to be more receptive to being able to be like, wait, I have this marginalization. I also don't want to marginalize others because I know how that feels. For me, it's always been that way since I was very young, where I knew that, you know, when I actually, like, knew that the bodies that were on our plates were people, you know, because I feel like people tend to not even think of animals as people, but I do. And I would think, I see them as I would see myself, and I want to liberate myself, and I want to liberate the person next to me or the person across from me. So I feel like the connections is that we're all marginalized, and I feel like it's kind of like special where, especially when marginalized people can see another person's marginalization and wanting to liberate them as well. I think that's why, like, these kinds of, like, conferences and things are, like, super important, so that we can connect with each other and really, you know, like, help each other in ways that we intimately know about ourselves. Oh my gosh, did I answer the question?
Okay. Good. It's good. Would you like to?
Yeah, well, I just wanted to relate an experience I had when I visited the African American Museum in Washington, D.C. The African American Museum in D.C. is actually very well organized. It's an amazing museum, and it traces the history of the slave trade, starting off with pre-colonial days, and traces its history in the United States. And what was very, very interesting and just a really powerful moment for me was that in the United States, when the slaves were first imported into the U.S., there wasn't a lot of difference between African slaves and white indentured European servants. But as the plantation system started growing, as they started developing these cash crops, and they needed a more permanent workforce, they began to codify slavery into law. And for that, they started making differences between blacks and whites. But the real change came around 1810, when the international slave trade was outlawed. They could no longer import slaves into the United States. And that's when the domestic slave trade started. And prior to that time, black slaves were allowed to maintain intact families. Children typically grew up in their same household. But once the domestic slave trade started, women became important and the men became expendable. I saw myself going down a chute like a male chicken. The men became something to be worked to death. The women became exploitable, just like female chickens, cows. That's when they began to be raped, to be purposely bred, and that's when families began to be broken up and having their children taken and sold as property. And so there's a direct correlation between what was done to African Americans as slaves and what we do to animals in terms of the exploitation. So yeah, there's a direct correlation, and it continues to this day.
And us being aware of that, knowing that, do you think it's okay for white vegans to, I guess, use those comparisons, that history that belongs to marginalized groups?
You know, I have a very good friend who's Jewish, and she's a vegan. And she makes direct comparisons between the Holocaust and what happens to the billions of animals that are murdered each year for human food. And I think that the comparisons that she makes are apt, but it's never a comparison that I would make, because I'm not Jewish, and I think that it would be misperceived if I tried to make that comparison. And I think that the same danger exists for white vegans to try and make those comparisons, that people will misperceive their intentions as dehumanizing people of color. So while the validity is there, I think that that is something they have to allow people of color to argue and not try to make those arguments themselves.
And can I just add to that as well, there are enough people of colour who've made those arguments for us to choose their narrative and to uplift their voice instead of other people making it for them.
But one important argument I think that women of all colors can make is about the exploitation of females in the animal agribusiness industry. Because that was something that was brought out to me by a Caucasian vegan woman that just blew my mind, because I had never stopped to think about it. That it's the women, the females we exploit.
But we have to remember that.
Okay, yeah, yeah, but also I guess be mindful that when we're talking about human perspectives, we're not just talking about men and women. We're talking about people who are. Is this what you were trying to say? Mm-hmm. People who are like non-binary and agender and so on. So just be yeah, just to add to that, not to negate. That was perfect.
No,
but
absolutely.
Just add.
Thank you.
I mean, you have to be sensitive all over. Yeah.
Thank you. That was perfect. And also, many vegans of color view veganism as one of the many tools to decolonize. Carla, could you explain this concept and what it is?
Yeah, so there's a really big movement happening pretty separately from the mainstream vegan movement, and it's kind of this awakening to decolonize. And many communities of color are using this term. At the end of the day, what it means to decolonize has gotten a little bit lost, even within this movement. That's just kind of a side note, but at the end of the day, to decolonize basically means to take land that was stolen from indigenous people and give it back. So, and building from there. But what a lot of folks are doing within communities of color are, reconnecting and reclaiming and just seeking out knowledge from their indigenous ancestors, wherever they are in the world. And I'm not talking about, I just want to make a quick note, because I'm not talking about like white people, especially in the Americas, that realize they're like 1/16 Native American and they like buy what are those called?
Dreamcatcher.
Yeah, that Dreamcatcher, or like now crystals are really popular, and like sage. Like recently, Sephora started selling like white sage, and it's like just really problematic because indigenous people like just were given like permission to reclaim some of these things, and now they're like selling it. And so anyways, that you kind of see where I'm going with that. But I'm talking about folks who are, trying to seek out this knowledge and start living, more based on this knowledge and adjusting their lifestyle. And a part of this movement is returning to plant-based eating, whether it's entirely plant-based or just mostly plant-based. And so a lot of folks, I'm so happy because a lot of folks have already touched on this, so I think I just want to reiterate that, plant-based eating, like that was happening before we called it veganism. And it's not, I think this is something else that a lot of folks have touched on, which is that it wasn't just this, it's not just this, like, you're just eating plants. It's also this relationship that indigenous people have with the environment and have with other animals. Comparing indigenous hunting practices to factory farming is not the same thing. We cannot treat them the same way, and I'm not a very popular vegan when I kind of talk about that, because of course we don't want any animal to suffer and die, but those are just such different things, and so we have to be careful about who we're attacking and who we're kind of putting at the forefront. And so you look at colonialism today. There's this history of colonialism, but then today we see, vegan outreach done in these ways that, against indigenous communities. I see especially a lot of, I'm from the United States, so I'm looking at this from an American context, but I see a lot of Americans, from the United States going to other countries within the Americas, going to other, quote unquote, third world countries. I hate that term, but and they're doing vegan outreach in a way that is just not appropriate. Michelle kind of touched on this as well, and so there's that aspect which makes veganism really unappealing to people who are aware of these kinds of issues, with colonialism and this neo-colonialism, this new colonialism that's happening today. But there's a lot of vegans of color who are seeing this reclaiming as a way to not just kind of reconnect with ancestry that's been stolen from us on purpose, but to also put it in a more current context. The number one killers, again, Michelle I think also mentioned this, our number one killers are health problems, preventable health problems, and that's not an accident. That's not like a side effect. That's very intentional. And so, it kind of gets fuzzy because there's so many issues with the way that we do outreach about veganism when it comes to health. There's a lot of health shaming. Obviously, there's a lot of fat shaming. And so it's one of those things where, the type of health outreach that you might have already seen happening within, vegan outreach in communities of color, it's very different, and it's set within this context of colonialism. And, it's almost like an act of, not almost, it is an act of resistance to choose health and to realize, this information is bringing me closer to that. And so that's just kind of I guess it's kind of a really quick overview of how, folks are looking at veganism through a decolonizing perspective. And it's very cool and exciting, so, but very radical. Not everyone, asking someone to, when you request, or how should I say this? I didn't introduce myself, so this is a good way to introduce myself. My work focuses on this kind of decolonizing. I'm the director of La Raza for Liberation, which is an organization that empowers Indigenous Latinx and Afro-Latinx activists, because we have a very shared common history. And it's to empower people across human, animal, and environmental justice. And our end goal isn't really like to make everyone vegan. That's definitely one of them. We would love a vegan world, but the end goal is decolonizing. It is, veganism, or I should say speciesism, for a lot of folks who engage in veganism in this way. Speciesism is a symptom of colonialism. So the ultimate enemy is not factory farms or the people that own them, or speciesism even. The ultimate enemy for us is colonialism or capitalism. Those things for me are very synonymous. So the work is going to look very, very different, and that's that should be respected and should be just as valid as, you know, mainstream vegan outreach.
Thanks. And going back to Selena's presentation, touching upon, you know, when there's someone with the inability to actually process plant foods because they just don't have a colon. But you know, the person's action, all the other actions are completely vegan. How would we be able to ensure that we are inclusive to people like that?
Okay, this is a really tough question because people are gonna disagree. People are gonna disagree here. So if we go back to Sam in my presentation, it doesn't have a colon, carrots come out whole, like I said. Then other than the fact that they don't have a choice to eat vegan food, their actions are vegan. If we look at the definition of veganism, which is roughly to do what is practical and possible, then they're doing everything that is practical and possible and more by running what is essentially a vegan business. But they would never call themselves vegan, and mostly that is because they would get attacked. And that attacking will lead them to say, why do I bother? And it's more damaging, I think. So I suppose that the question is, you know, is that a definition that we go by to do what is practical and possible? I'm not suggesting, by the way, that we call them vegan. I'm not suggesting that they call themselves vegan. I'm not suggesting that we don't, or that they don't. It's just a question to ask. As I said in my presentation, this person probably does more than I do for veganism in terms of promoting and spreading the word. My business isn't like fully set up yet, but it will be a vegan business. We won't be calling it vegan. We'll be calling it a consistently anti-oppression business. And we have actually had vegans sort of like say to us, it's like, well, is it vegan? It's like, yeah, everything's like plant-based. We adopt an anti-oppression movement. There's like, well, why aren't you centering the animals? Why aren't animals all over your page? Why aren't, it's like, well, actually it's a business to support people with autism that just happens to also be vegan and happens to also try to be consistently anti-oppression in its business model. So, and it's almost kind of like coming back to what you were saying, Carla, it's like this whole idea about animals first. Is if you only take that as your mantra, you'll probably, it might be alienating to some people in a way that is actually detrimental to animals. Sometimes we need to change our approach depending upon what it is. Anyway, I think I probably answered my question in my presentation. Does anyone else have anything to add?
No, and I think we wanted to make sure to say that this is not in support of ridiculous concepts like veganish, which promotes the consumption of non-humans while claiming to be vegan despite having a choice.
Yeah, we need to really make sure that we are highlighting the difference between those that have a choice and those who have, for example, medical conditions or disabilities, which means that they don't have a choice or don't have a choice right now.
Can I say something really quickly?
Mm-hmm.
David Carter, who bills himself as a 300-pound vegan, has a saying. He says, you know, animals don't care why people stop eating them as long as they stop. And one thing that I think is just real important, especially when you talk about expanding the reach of veganism, is we have to be careful about insisting that people adopt our agenda for accepting veganism. I know that that animal rights is very important to a lot of people, and it is important. But you can't walk up to someone and say, this is why you need to do this. You have to find out where that person is and what's going to make them adopt veganism. And if it's health, then talk about health. If it's environmental, then talk about environmental, because the bottom line is they go vegan for health, if they go vegan for environmental reasons, if they go vegan just because they like the fact that their skin turns orange, they will stop eating animals. And that's...
But I think the problem with that is we're beyond eating animals. Like, it's not just about eating animals. It's not other animals. Other animals are exploited for everything. So someone just not eating animals is not our goal. Our goal is consistent anti-oppression.
I got you. But, again, the Chinese proverb that's a cliche, the journey of 10,000 miles starts somewhere. And I'm a physician, and I know that when a patient comes into my office and I need to get them to change their life, if I dump everything on them at once, they're walking out. If I get them to start somewhere and then they come back and I get them to move a little further, eventually I get them to where they need to be. None of us became vegan overnight. None of us sprang as these perfect vegans from Zeus's head like Medusa, fully formed. We've got, I mean not Medusa, but Athena. We've got to allow people room and time to grow, and to stop wanting everything right now. That's what's killing us.
I'm actually an ecologist, so I understand about the different interconnections between things. And if you're just focusing on one thing, you're losing a whole other side of what you need to be part of that. So in saying that we need to accept this or that, I don't accept that, because there's a difference between supporting someone towards a specific goal and just saying, hey, cool, so you are plant-based, but nice leather shoes, and I love that perfume that was tested on, you know. So there's a very, very clear difference, and I think what we're here to talk about is how those connections are so important, regardless of, you know, I know a lot of, or some of the speakers here did not come into veganism for non-humans, but they didn't stop there. And I think that's the part that's so important, that no, it's not okay for you to just stop there.
I'm not saying you stop there, but I'm saying you start there. And ultimately, you get a person to start someplace, and then you bring them along with the other issues.
I guess I wanted to say, like for me, I first, like, I'll put in a personal anecdote really quickly. When my mother told me when I was 4 years old, I watched a Shake and Bake commercial, and I don't know if anybody knows what Shake and Bake is. And it was basically, the commercial was a headless chicken running into the bag, running into the oven. And I saw this, and I made what people would say the connection, where it was, this is what animals are, like, we're eating animals, and I love animals, and I don't want to eat animals anymore. And I was very frantic with my mother, and essentially, like, my family was like, you know, had a very tough time with me, like, eating chicken and eating other animals. Now, I say this because, like, from then on, what I'm talking about is that I understand the need to, like, you know, take things slow. Since I was 4 years old, and then from 11 years old when I watched that PETA commercial with like all the baby chicks like getting ground up into, you know, by McDonald's and things, and you know, I boycotted McDonald's for like a week, and then I went back, and then I was battling with it, but you know, for, you know, 11 years later, and I think it's because one of the things that I've learned was that since I was 4 years old, veganism was about what I was consuming in my mind, and that what I I was consuming speciesism. I was consuming, you know, all of these things that, you know, that tell us that animals are less than, and that that humans were above them, and this is what we're supposed to do. And I truly believe that, you know, yes, it does start from somewhere, and yes, it does take people sometimes a really long time, like it did for me. Like you know, processing all of that. It took me many, many years to get where I am right now to process it. But, you know, like, yes, like I did veganism, like raw veganism for like a short amount of time because of health reasons and things like that. My parents are also kind of doing that and things like that. But yes, we all start somewhere, but we're talking more so about like a system of oppression, and that, you know, just like how any other oppression shouldn't be tolerable to any degree, I don't think speciesism should also be tolerated to any degree. And sometimes, like, you know, I don't even, you know, we can just talk to people about that, about the ideology behind it and why we're doing these things, because I feel like people kind of do things backwards, where they're like, you know, eat plant-based. And then there's not really like a solid foundation of the reason why, because I got that foundation of the reason why when I was 4 years old, where I was like, oh, this is why I'm doing this. And I feel like other people, sometimes they come into it where it's like, I'm doing all of this hard work, but I don't know where it's coming from. You know, so I think, you know, like saying, I'm sorry, like I'm just, but yeah, I get what you're saying about, like, you know, people have to start somewhere, but I'm like, I feel like we have to start from a different somewhere, you know? Like, yes, health is important. Health is very important, but, you know, or the environment's very important, and that's very important, but you know, but we also need to talk about, you know, the reason why veganism is here.
Because I often...
Let me just make one last statement. I mean, I agree with that. One of the things that I found is that one of the fundamental ways that allows people to eat meat is the lie that they tell themselves that animals are not beings, that they don't have feelings, that they don't have minds, they don't have emotions. When people give up eating meat, give up eating animals, they can stop lying to themselves about the sentience of these animals. Once they are beyond that, they are much freer and more open to being able to receive the other arguments and the other truth. Whereas my experience has been, if you hit them with all of that at once, they're more resistant. So I want to hit them with what they can accept. And if I can show them stopping this is going to improve your health, and then it improves their health, and they're not eating these animals, then they're free to realize, oh my God, I shouldn't be wearing them. I shouldn't be using them to test crap just so I can put it on my face.
Well, I think unfortunately, I think this is something we deal with a lot within our communities, is that we don't feel that that's true because of something called racialized speciesism, where, okay, so I feel better, I do it for my health, but I still don't have a reason to care. And there's still a wall, because...
That hasn't been my experience. I deal with a lot of Black vegans, and I mean, that has not been my experience.
I didn't go vegan for the animals. I went vegan because I realized how many resources it took to create animal products, and it was horrifying to me because at the time I was working at a women's homeless shelter, so I was working with the hungry, and it was really quite like life-changing to realize that we were feeding billions of animals and still had people who were hungry. So I totally resonate with what you say about, you know, people needing to distance themselves sometimes from the animal products in order to make that connection, because that has been my experience. I did not have sympathy for other animals. I liked animals, but it wasn't so much to the point where I was like, oh, like, I shouldn't eat them. But I think for me, what I get frustrated with now is that, I hear, and I'm going to be honest, I mostly hear white vegans say this, I don't care what you eat as long as it's not an animal. And I have a huge problem with that, because I run into this other issue that you pointed out where, it is a lot to hit someone with everything, because, like, I have to figure out, okay, so when am I going to talk to this vegan, and white or POC vegan, when am I going to start a conversation about where they're getting their bananas from? Because the banana industry is horrible, horrible. When am I going to start talking to them about the chocolate they're eating that's vegan? When am I going to start talking to them about the coffee that they're drinking? So, yeah, it's a lot, and for most people, you can't throw everything on them at once, and at the end of the day, there's really no ethical consumption under capitalism, so we're just all trash all the time. But we do have to be consistent, and we have to keep pushing, and we have to keep pushing ourselves to do better wherever we can, wherever we have access and ability, and trying to push others into that direction as well, and never getting to this point where we're like, oh, well, I'm doing enough because I'm vegan. No, that's for us, that's very, bare minimum.
Selena?
I think what I'm taking from this, and what I believe, is that there are many different ways to approach things with people, and there are different situations where one method would be more appropriate than another. In my opinion, it's not appropriate for a physician or a doctor to talk to their patient about ethical consumption, as in like eating animals and so on, for regarding the reasons around animal rights. In other scenarios, it would be more appropriate than that. In Puerto Rico, it might be more appropriate to be talking about indigenous rights and food poverty and those kinds of things, right? So, and I think that we've all got a different style and approach with everyone. I've got a friend who talks about converting vegans, and they keep a tally chart, and that's great. It's not my style. But people around me do turn vegan. I don't ask them to. I don't push them. I usually don't even suggest to them. I'm just a really good cook. And like, yeah, I fed Kez and Caemawr when they got into Ireland, and it was great. But what I find happens with me is that I try to lead by example. Not saying that I'm wonderful or anything, but people can see with me that it's not that difficult. I make it look not difficult. So that's my method, and I think that together we can make an impact.
But I think what was important to me is like you can't just stop there, or and I think that's what's important to me, because I came into it for animal rights. Like, I don't care about my health. Like, I mean, I care about my health, but like, whatever. Like,
but I like donuts.
I like donuts.
Absolutely. My 9-year-old niece was eating chicken nuggets one day, and she was talking about how she wanted to become a veterinarian. And her brother started laughing at her and said, "Don't you realize you're eating a chicken?" And she said, "No, I'm not." After he showed her that, she started crying and has never eaten meat since. Different things appeal to different people. That's all I'm saying, and that we have to meet people where they are. You know, I'm a Christian, and I take my cues from the Bible. And Jesus, who I believe was God, said to his disciples, "I've got many things to tell you guys, but you're not ready yet." And I just take that as my walking papers, that we have to meet people where they are and tell them things as they're ready and give them time to grow.
But I think
now, again, with
Yeah.
always keep in mind that we're not stopping here.
Yeah.
It's just like when you go to kindergarten, they don't teach you calculus, but they intend to. But you're in kindergarten, so
But it's I think
Please speak for yourself. You're not autistic. So.
It's
Sorry,
a starting
joking.
point. It's a starting point, and I mean we can agree to disagree, but you know we are coming from it from different perspectives, and we're going to have different approaches, and we're not the same people whom we were when we first became
But
vegan.
I think what I'm trying to express that's not coming out is that it's like how Kes was saying, it goes way beyond that, and I think that that's kind of, I can't use this word. I don't see it as a victory for someone to just go plant-based, because to me they're still adding to the oppression of so many others. So it's a starting point, but what we need to be aware of is that it is a starting point, and we can't just go easy because yay, another vegan who is racist. And
So what we're saying is single issue veganism hurts people. It hurts human animals, and it hurts non-human animals.
Right.
And I agree with you 100% because I've had white vegans tell me they care about animals and couldn't give a damn what happens to black people. And to me, I don't think you really even care about the animals if that's really how you feel. Because if you can look at a human being and not care what happens to them, you don't care about them.
So I think we have 2 more questions, and then we'll wrap it up. Yeah. So I think we're all on the same page that also respect and credit given where it is due to people of color and other cultures is vital as we work towards non-human animal liberation. And Winnie, what does this mean to you?
Thank you, Julia, for that question. So I'm Winnie. I go by Winnie because my parents have always called me Winnie, although my birth name has been Amrita Kaur. And I'm a PhD candidate in literary and cultural studies at the University of Cincinnati in Ohio, United States. I'm also a research fellow for the federal government in Washington, D.C. And to answer your question, I'd like to invoke 3 concepts, some of which, Carla, you've already touched on. Commodity fetishism, cultural appropriation, and human and non-human animal rights under the aegis of animal rights together. So often, when we first delve into a vegan lifestyle, we focus on finding animal-free food alternatives, for most of us at least. In the midst of finding vegan versions or substitutes of these flesh, dairy, honey, and egg products, we look to global cuisines and their so-called exotic ingredients and spices, such as those found in African and South Asian foods. What we often don't realize is that the cultures of people of color, especially those that hail from India, like me, have historically always revolved around centering legumes, lentils, beans, seeds, nuts, fruits, and vegetables at the heart of their cuisine. And of course, plenty of those exotic superfoods, herbs, and spices that we also dearly love. So not getting into the politics of food deserts or even the subsidization of meat and dairy by several governments, many of these plant-based foods I described above, especially when in their raw form, are usually more affordable than buying processed vegan alternatives like vegan caviar, vegan shrimp, or even vegan beef patties that we find as an example in grocery stores today. So raw versus processed vegan foods there. So when colonization and capitalism infiltrated the food cultures of my people in India, consuming meat and dairy soon began to be associated as a marker of wealth and upward mobility, with little regard to the treatment of sentient non-human animals. Growing up, meat was considered a delicacy in my home. We were only allowed to eat meat, or we could only afford to eat meat maybe once a month. In India, for example, the British Raj, the British rule, followed by the rise in corporate greed post-independence, which is the post-1947 era, led the way to excessive consumerism and commodity fetishism. We're obsessed with this idea of consuming, buying. We associate our vegan identity often with this idea of buying vegan products. Even though countries like India and China, they're continuing to raise their animal product consumption every year in an effort to imitate the corporate greed-laden practices of the West, there has been a recent trend of growing populations of vegans, both in India as well as here in the diaspora. Besides the obvious environmental, ethical, eco-feminist, spiritual, and health reasons, this is also largely attributed to the fact that technology companies have now been investing millions of dollars in clean food tech startups and producing vegan versions of animal products that have become so mainstream today. Today, you could even walk into an American White Castle. People know White Castle? Mm-hmm. Yes. And you can order a delicious, albeit very processed, vegan Impossible slider for just $1.79. Or walk into your local grocery store and buy a variety of vegan meats and ice creams, unless you live in a food desert, which of course is another topic to explore for another time. The problem, however, is that when these companies and other folks, in my experience, usually cis, able-bodied white men who are in power and those with access to large fiscal resources, claim that they have discovered something groundbreaking in vegan food cuisine. This reminds me of Columbus. So many staples like rice, lentils, beans, spices, and vegetables have existed, obviously, since pre-colonial times, and are certainly not a discovery made in the West, certainly not a discovery of Silicon Valley entrepreneurs. So, for example, when juice bars located inside yoga studios, largely owned by white people in North America, decide to label their juices and smoothies Om Shanti Om, or advertise classes such as Christian or biblical yoga, the South Asian in me feels offended, because this is clearly cultural appropriation for capital gains that proliferates an exclusive kind of consumerist veganism that is rooted in mere trade of buying or selling versus education of others, or appreciation versus appropriation of another culture. So what are businesses like these doing to raise the voices of people of color in their yoga and juice bar spaces, for example? Where are the African and South Asian yoga instructors, the Kemetic yoga instructors, the South Asian yoga instructors? Why are these spaces mostly white, at least in North America, and centered around the trope of eat, pray, love? Are some of the proceeds even being donated to support sentient non-human animals from these purchases, let alone the vulnerable POC communities and their causes? If not, can we all please do something better here? Because in the end, it would be great to live in an equitable world that doesn't thrive on the suffering, death, and torture of its most marginalized, may it be human or non-human. So when you hear me talking the word animal rights, I always allude to human as well as non-human rights, because in the end, I consider all of us animals. We're all part of the same ecosystem. We're all part of the same, nature system. While I can talk about humans, I can say, yes, I want humans to go vegan. Obviously, I can't change the entire ecosystem. I can't expect lions to go vegan. Can't expect tigers to go vegan. So there's a limit to that as well, right? So I can't obviously, when I say everyone in the world should go vegan, I'm not talking about people with disabilities. I'm not talking about, other animals. I'm talking about humans who have clear choices available to them to do and make these conscious choices. And that's that, in solidarity.
Thank you. The last question, to add to this conversation as the panel section comes to a close, as something that falls on both white vegans and vegans of color, Doreen, what responsibility do you feel people in the global north have to people in the global south when it comes to use of non-human animals and animal exploitation?
Thank you, Julia. So I'm just going to give a little background of myself, just so you to have some context of where my answer is coming from. I'm originally from Ghana, but I grew up mostly in Japan and also in the States. I've also lived in China, in the UK, in Senegal, and now I live in Switzerland. And I'm sort of going to be answering this from the perspective of what do vegans of color, specifically in the North, owe people in the South. So people like me, we sort of inhabit this weird space in between being oppressed by white supremacy in the North, just like our counterparts in the South, but at the same time we also benefit from some of the benefit from colonialism, from neocolonialism, by having access to all the infrastructure that we have available, by education that came by oppressing our relatives, our ancestors. And at the same time, nowadays, we are decimating local food systems. In the case of Ghana, for example, we import meat from Brazil and from Ireland, completely killing the local food system. And in Ghana, we also tend to have this sort of collective amnesia and collective trauma, where we sort of believe that we obviously have a cognitive understanding that our history didn't start with British colonialism, but at the same time, we believe that our history started with British colonialism. So, we all have to be Christian because that's what British colonialism brought. And I think, as KR said, and I think it's been mentioned a few times, veganism isn't something that is Western. Maybe we use the language that we use to describe our ideology might be Western, but the concept itself and the ideology isn't Western. But when we then go and try to create consistent anti-oppression, that is ending oppression of non-human animals and of humans, I feel like it's very difficult to go to my counterpart in Ghana, to go up to my cousins and say, I'm not saying this as an oppressor, as a colonizer, as they would say in what's it called? What's the country called?
Wakanda. Sounds like my
Wakanda, yes, Wakanda, thank you. Like they would say in Wakanda. I'm saying this as a person who's also from Ghana. We need to stop eating animals. And they could turn around and say to me, but how can you say that? Like, you want us to stop participating in this oppression when you benefit from our oppression when you go back to your house in Switzerland. So I don't know that I have an answer as to what specifically we owe them, but I do know that there are people of color already in the North who are advocating for redistributive justice, for reparations to former colonies in the Caribbean and in Latin America and in Africa and in Asia. But concretely, what do these reparations look like? Because reparations don't stop just at money, and even if we give money back, that's just a form of continuing capitalism. And I feel like consistent anti-oppression has to look at ending capitalism as well. Mm-hmm. So what does it mean? Does it mean that we give people their, obviously, I don't know, we give people access to better crops. We stop exploiting the oil reserves that are in the Niger Delta and other parts of the world, and allow that land to be refertilized and used by the local people in the forms of co-ops. I don't know that I have the answers, and unfortunately we're at the end of the panel, so I don't know that we can discuss it among ourselves, but I am curious to know, and I would like to know what my other panelists would think. Maybe if you could, in like 30 seconds or less, if you have a response as to what do we, vegans of color in the North, owe our families and our friends and our other counterparts from where we come from.
I mean, I'm gonna jump in real quick because it resonates so much. I lived 14 years in the United States, in New York. I grew up in Puerto Rico, and I moved when I was 24. Then I moved to New York, and I lived 14 years, and I came back. I felt after the hurricane, it was very emotional. I don't think that it was a rational decision. It was emotional on the spot. I said, I have to go back and do something. And the only thing at my disposal that I had was Chili's on Wheels, which is an emergency food distribution organization. And so I was like, well, I can give food. And so I was able to find funding and go to Puerto Rico, and we even gave out meals. But it doesn't stop there, right? Because it's not what you can do in that one particular moment. But I feel like you have to refine roots and reimagine, rebuild. Like, it goes beyond like relief of what you can do once, and 10,000 meals, 15,000 meals, but it felt like the need to really root in and help in that rebuilding, taking whatever I had already, built in New York and bringing those resources in. But the thought of being a colonizer in your country comes to mind a lot, because you're bringing in these ideas that you gained in the North. You know, you're bringing in these ideas that you took from the white folk, and you're bringing it back. And so there's that contradiction all the time of how am I was colonized, but now I'm doing like that work back, and what a mindfuck that is, you know, because it's tough. But I think that so then we stayed and we created this house, this vegan community house, and we provide the food because it felt like I was just providing the food, but there was no context to that food that I was providing. And so we built like an education center where people then can come and learn about veganism and in other contexts. And so it just feels like we have to expand on the role of what we're doing, like bringing information, bringing resources, bringing in the sometimes a lot of, and I don't know, maybe for Puerto Rico, they lost because of the constant oppression. Still, more than 500 years of oppression, you lose your spark, you lose your will to do things, and so people don't really have that initiative of starting groups and doing these things, because you're just trying to survive, man. Like you don't get that chance. So I think that part of it is like that spark of like to do something. Even it inspires other folks then to do something, and we've been able to like start other initiatives while I'm there. I'm sorry, I just kept talking about myself.
That's such a fabulous question. I just want to say really quickly, I'm so sorry. You know the Food Empowerment Project, right?
Yes.
It's giving backpacks to kids, right? And the other interesting question I want to put to you is, let's just say we do things like education, which is, I think, number one priority, right? I mean, definitely food and other relief as well. Education. One of the first effect is to make them be less vegan. First thing they do is eat more animal foods. The first effect. See what I'm trying to say here? If they're getting more education, they're not immediately going to go vegan, right? But that is the first thing.
Yeah, I guess because thanks to the U.S., we're sort of McDonaldizing the global South. I don't know if I have an answer to, what if the first step is to then follow in our footsteps and start eating processed meat and, contributing to even higher levels of animal exploitation than take place right now already, besides continuing to advocate and say, this isn't us, this is not what our roots are, this is not what our ancestors were doing. We need to reject the old colonialism and the new colonialism, and that means that we need to reject our oppression and the oppression that we are not only suffering from but also contributing to.
Yeah, I think that honestly the dismantling is in some ways a lot easier, because we know that this isn't working and this is not right. This is the hard part, though, is like, what do we want after this? What do we want to build? What does this like utopian world look like, and how on earth do we get there? And with regards to who has the answer, I mean, something that I don't know if I need to go there, but I think we talk about this a lot, in our communities, about how not everyone's opinion is as valid, depending on what you're talking about. Especially if it's a very uneducated opinion, or an opinion from someone who doesn't directly experience what we're speaking about. And when we think about just fixing all the things that have been done, again, I want to kind of reiterate, decolonizing, what that really means is giving the land back, and that doesn't fix everything, because the land is, we've ravaged it. Is that a word? Ravaged?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. We give it back, and then what? Or I think you said too, we give money, and then what? It's like there's no way to undo what's been done. I don't think it's
what's going on,
or what's going on. Yeah. it's not ever going to be like it was, but that's not really the point. The point isn't to just go back to our ancestral ways just because it's tradition. The point is to think critically about it, right? So yeah, and I think we should really listen to the, personally I think we should really listen to, you know, what present day Indigenous communities want, what they want, because they're the ones who are going to set that foundation. And from there we can build. And we're not going to know what it looks like. We're not going to know. And we might disagree, and it might displace, I mean, us even, you know. But that's kind of what we have to accept.
And on that note,
I had just one last idea I want to throw out. I think it all starts with our health, because it can be shown that human beings are strict herbivores. And when you understand that...
So, unfortunately, we don't have time for that.
Okay.
Because it's really past the time. So, Carla, if you could...
Oh, yes.
So that's a
closing
Yes, please.
Do I stand up, or...?
You can go over there.
Okay, I'm going to go over here. Well, I'm just going to make this super, super brief. I just wanted to end the panel by saying, kind of reiterating something that was already said, which is, please don't take this information if you are not a person of color and try to get like a non-vegan person of color to go vegan with what has been said. It was said before, I can't remember by who, just point them in the direction of someone who has that experience and who can share that information. I had a very recent interaction that I think really speaks to this, where a white vegan was explaining a very frustrating encounter with a person of color about this. So this person of color works for like one of these organizations that works with like cats and dogs and saves those, and we all know how we feel about those, because they still eat meat. You know, they go home at the end of the day and then they eat like a different animal, so it's very strange and it's very frustrating. And so they were having an argument with this person about that, and I was trying to explain to them how, you know, yes, they're right. They're absolutely right in their frustration. They're absolutely right in the connections that they were trying to make with this person about the kind of parallels, right, between, you know, being a person of color, or even just the parallel of working with cats and dogs. But then, you know, it's like, what is this contradictory thing? And the thing that was missing from their whole awareness about this interaction was that, you know, they were specifically a white femme yelling at this black man about why they should go vegan. And when you spend your whole life, and I can't speak for black men because obviously I don't look like one, but I do understand that when you spend your whole life being yelled at and or not even just being yelled at, but being talked at like that by white people, that history, that context, it doesn't just disappear just because you're right, just because what you're saying is true. The messenger does matter. It kind of sucks sometimes, and I get that frustration. You know, I, as a white passing person of color, you know, there are times where I have to shut my mouth because, you know, it's not going to be understood the way that I would like it to be. So the point is, you know, stay away from this mentality that you have to be the one to change that person, that you have to be that savior. You know, you don't know what is going on in that person's life, what's going on in their mind. You don't know who they're going to meet down the line. So if you just give them a resource of, you know, someone else who can resonate with them more, that is definitely a much better seed to plant than adding on to this reputation that animal rights and veganism has as being a white person yelling at everyone about going vegan, right? We don't want to just keep fueling that image because it's hurting us. It's hurting all of us as a movement. So those are the two just kind of key points I wanted to end with.
if you want to chat with me more. If you